The afternoon sun was warm, and the streets were filled with the sound of children laughing and cars driving slowly back to their homes. Jamal, a 12-year-old schoolboy, walked down the sidewalk with his backpack hanging loosely on his shoulders. His school day had been long, but he was happy it was finally over. He loved walking home because it gave him time to daydream. Sometimes he imagined himself as a superhero flying above the rooftops. Other times he thought about becoming a famous basketball player, scoring the winning shot while the crowd cheered his name. Today, he just hummed a little tune he had learned in music class, his feet moving in rhythm with his song, Jamal's. Shoes scuffed the pavement as he passed rows of neat houses. Some lawns were freshly cut, others had sprinklers spraying water into the air, making rainbows in the sunlight. He liked this neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. He had walked this path many times, and usually no one paid much attention to him. He was just another kid heading home after school, lost in his own little world. But today was different. Across the street, behind a white picket fence, a woman stood watching him. Her name was Mrs. Harper. She had lived in the neighborhood for years and always felt the need to know everything about everyone. She noticed Jamal walking alone, and for reasons she never admitted to herself. She immediately grew suspicious. Jamal wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just walking and humming, but in her mind, she began to imagine stories that weren't true. She narrowed her eyes and muttered, "What is that boy doing here?" Jamal, of course, didn't notice. He was too busy counting the cracks on the sidewalk and swinging his backpack from side to side like a pendulum. He stopped for a moment to tie his shoelace and then continued walking. A small group of children rode past him on their bicycles, laughing as the wind rushed past their faces. Jamal smiled at them, wishing he could join, but his mother had told him to come straight home after school today. He respected her words. As he walked farther, Jamal spotted a dog barking behind a fence. He waved at the animal, chuckling when the dog tilted its head in confusion. It was little moments like these that made his walk fun. He loved animals, and he hoped to have a dog of his own one day. His thoughts drifted again, and he imagined himself training a big, loyal dog that would run beside him every day after school. Meanwhile, Mrs. Harper continued watching. She saw him pause, saw him looking at the dog, and her mind twisted it into something else. Why is he stopping? Why is he hanging around? She thought. She didn't see a harmless schoolboy. She saw trouble where none existed. Jamal finally reached the corner of the street where he usually crossed. He checked for cars, just like his mother had taught him, and carefully stepped onto the crosswalk. The late afternoon breeze brushed against his face, and he felt good. In his backpack, he carried his math homework, a book he had borrowed from the school library, and a half-eaten sandwich from lunch. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. Just the ordinary belongings of a schoolboy. But Mrs. Harper didn't see it that way. Her eyes followed every move he made, and her imagination painted him as someone he was not. She had no reason, no evidence, just a feeling she could not explain. And yet, that feeling grew stronger every second. On the other side of the street, Jamal slowed down a little. He liked to look at the trees that lined the sidewalk, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. A few golden leaves fluttered down, even though it wasn't quite autumn yet. He picked one up, studied it with curiosity, and tucked it into his book as a little keepsake. He smiled to himself, thinking maybe he could use it for a school project. Life was simple for Jamal. He wasn't worried about anything. He wasn't rushing. He was just being a kid, enjoying the walk home, taking in the sights, the sounds, and the peace of the afternoon. But while he enjoyed his walk, he remained unaware that danger was slowly forming just a few steps behind him. Not the danger of the streets. Not a stranger with bad intentions, but the danger of being judged unfairly. Mrs. Harper crossed her arms, still staring. She tapped her phone in her hand, debating with herself. To her, Jamal didn't look right. To her, his skin color and the fact that she didn't recognize him were enough reasons to worry. She didn't ask herself if he might just be a student from the local school. She didn't consider that he might live nearby. Our thoughts were clouded with fear and prejudice. And she let those thoughts grow instead of pushing them away. Jamal kept walking, whistling now instead of humming, and his steps were light. He thought about telling his mom how his teacher had praised him for doing well in class today. Couldn't wait to share the good news when he got home. He imagined her smile and maybe even a proud hug. It made him walk a little faster, eager to reach the comfort of his home. But behind him, Mrs. Harper finally made up her mind. She no longer just watched. She began to act. Her fingers tapped the screen and she lifted the phone to her ear. She looked around, making sure she wasn't the only one noticing, but in truth, no one else had paid Jamal any attention. To everyone else, he was just another kid walking home. To her, he was something else. And with that single call, an ordinary afternoon was about to change forever. Asterisk Mrs. Harper stood at her window, her fingers gripping the edge of the curtain. As she watched the boy continue down the street, something about him unsettled her, though she could not explain why. He was not loud. He was not breaking anything. He was not even walking too close to her yard. Yet in her mind, she had already decided that his presence was unusual, maybe even dangerous. Her thoughts began to spin in circles. Who is he? Where did he come from? Why is he walking here? The questions raced, but instead of seeking calm answers, she fed her own fear. He doesn't belong here, she whispered under her breath, though she had never seen him before and knew nothing about him. Jamal, meanwhile, was still enjoying his walk. He had no idea that every innocent step he took was being judged. He slowed near a tree and placed the golden leaf he had picked into his book. To him, it was just a small treasure from nature. But from Mrs. Harper's window, his pause looked suspicious. She narrowed her eyes and thought, is he trying to hide something? Her mind twisted the harmless act into something dark. She was sure. She saw him glance around, though in truth, Jamal was simply looking both ways before crossing another street. He was careful, the way his mother had taught him, but to her, it looked like sneaky behavior. Why is he looking around like that? What's he planning? She muttered. The neighborhood was usually quiet at this time of day. Most parents were still at work, and children were either inside or at after-school programs. Jamal walking alone stood out to her not because he was truly suspicious, but because she wanted him to be. Prejudice has a way of inventing stories in people's minds. And in Mrs. Harper's mind, simple walk home had already turned into a crime scene waiting to happen. She thought about calling her neighbor, but she didn't want to wait. The idea of involving the police grew stronger by the second. She convinced herself that she was protecting the community, that she was being responsible. In truth, she was letting fear and judgment lead her. Jamal stopped for a moment to adjust his backpack strap. It was digging into his shoulder, and he shifted it to make it more comfortable. He didn't think twice about it, but Mrs. Harper gasped, quietly, convinced he had pulled something out of the bag. Her imagination painted pictures that weren't real. She thought of burglars, troublemakers, even worse. He's carrying something, she said to herself, though she could clearly see it was just a school bag. She reached for her phone again, her thumb hovering over the keypad. She hesitated, looking at Jamal, who was now just a few steps away from turning the corner. If he disappeared, she would never know where he went. In her mind, letting him go felt dangerous, as if she were ignoring a threat. Her heartbeat quickened. The world outside her window seemed louder. She thought of all the news stories she had seen about crime, forgetting that those stories were not about this child in front of her. Still, she mixed them together in her imagination until Jamal became the villain in her mind's movie. At that very moment, Jamal bent down to tie his shoelace again. His fingers worked quickly, and he double-knotted them like his mom had shown. He didn't want them coming loose during the rest of his walk. But when he crouched low, Mrs. Harper panicked. He's crouching. What is he doing? Maybe he's checking the ground for something. Maybe he's hiding something. Her voice rose in her own living room, though no one else was listening. Her assumption hardened into belief. In her mind, Jamal was no longer just a boy. He was now a stranger with unknown intentions. She no longer asked herself whether she might be wrong. She never thought about the possibility that he was simply a student going home. Her thumb pressed against the phone screen. She dialed the number she knew too well. As the ringing tone filled her ear, her body stiffened with nervous energy. She looked again at Jamal, who was now standing up straight and continuing his peaceful walk, completely unaware of the storm she was creating. The line clicked. A calm voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Mrs. Harper took a breath and spoke, her words sharp and certain, though they had no truth behind them. There's a suspicious boy in the neighborhood. I don't know what he's doing, but he doesn't look like he belongs here. He's acting strange, stopping, crouching, looking around. I think you need to send someone. Her voice shook slightly, but she felt a rush of self-importance. She believed she was keeping her community safe. She didn't stop to think that she might be ruining a child's afternoon or even his future. With her words, on the other end of the call, the dispatcher typed details quickly and sent a message to the nearest patrol cars. To them, it was routine. Check on a report of a suspicious person. They had no idea it was just a schoolboy walking home. Jamal turned the corner, humming again, smiling because he could already see the familiar row of houses that led to his own. Home was close. He thought about his mom cooking dinner, about telling her the story of his day. He felt safe, not knowing that behind him, police cars were already on their way. Mrs. Harper hung up the phone, her heart racing. She peeked out the window again, watching Jamal disappear further down the street. She felt proud of herself, convinced she had done the right thing. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. The ordinary afternoon had shifted into something darker. A simple call, based on nothing but assumption, was about to turn a child's peaceful walk into a moment of fear. And soon, the whole neighborhood would witness what happens when judgment and prejudice meet the wrong person at the wrong time. The sound of distant sirens broke the calm of the afternoon. At first, they were faint, almost blending into the normal city noise. But soon, the wailing grew louder, echoing between the houses. Birds scattered from the trees, startled by the sharp rise in sound. Jamal paused for a moment, tilting his head. He always found sirens exciting, a sign that something important was happening somewhere else. He thought maybe there was a fire, or maybe an accident on the main road. Never, not even for a second, did he imagine the sirens were racing toward him. Around the corner, Mrs. Harper's heart leaped. The police were coming, and she felt a strange sense of relief. In her mind, she had done her duty as a responsible citizen. She kept peeking through the curtain, her eyes glued to the street, waiting for the cars to appear. She imagined herself explaining to the officers how she had seen something suspicious, how she had acted quickly. She was ready to play the role of the concerned neighbor. Moments later, 2 patrol cars turned into the neighborhood, their lights flashing red and blue. The sirens switched off, but the lights kept spinning, casting colorful flashes across the houses. The quiet street instantly transformed. A few neighbors looked out from their windows, surprised to see police in their usually peaceful block. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open, and whispers filled the air. Jamal's heart began to beat faster. He looked over his shoulder and saw the police cars pulling up near him. For a second, he froze in confusion. His first thought was that something serious must have happened nearby, and maybe they wanted to warn him. But then, one of the cars stopped just a few feet from him. The officer inside opened the door and stepped out. "Hey, kid," the officer called. His voice was loud, carrying authority. Jamal blinked, unsure if the man was talking to him. He looked around, but there was no one else on the street. It was just him. "Yes, sir," Jamal said softly, his voice trembling a little. The second patrol car parked across the street. Another officer stepped out, scanning the area as if searching for danger. Jamal's stomach twisted. Why were they looking at him like that? What had he done? He clutched the strap of his backpack tighter, wishing he could disappear. The first officer walked closer. "What are you doing out here?" he asked firmly. Jamal swallowed hard. I'm just walking home from school." His words came out shaky, almost like a question instead of an answer. The officer's eyes narrowed, studying him as though the simple explanation wasn't enough. "Walking home, huh? Where do you live?" Jamal pointed down the street nervously. "Just over there, a few blocks away." From behind her window, Mrs. Harper watched with satisfaction. She saw the officers questioning Jamal, and in her mind, she felt justified. "See," she whispered to herself. "I knew something was off." She didn't hear his trembling voice. She didn't see the fear in his eyes. She only saw what she wanted to see. Boy stopped by police. More neighbors began to gather quietly, stepping out onto their porches, curious about the flashing lights. Some frowned, wondering why the police were questioning a child. Others stayed silent, unwilling to get involved. The street that was calm minutes ago now felt heavy with tension. Jamal's hands grew sweaty. He tried to speak again. "I didn't do anything. I was just coming from school. You can check my bag if you want." His voice cracked, and he bit his lip, trying not to cry. The second officer stepped closer. "We got a call about someone acting suspicious in the area. You fit the description." Jamal's heart pounded so loudly he thought they could hear it. But I didn't do anything. I was just tying my shoe, that's all." His voice was desperate, pleading for them to believe him. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. To them, it was routine to question, to check, to make sure. But to Jamal, it was terrifying. He had never been in trouble, never even talked back to a teacher. And now 2 grown men in uniforms with badges and guns were treating him like a criminal. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like stone. He wanted to scream, but his throat was dry. He could only stand there, frozen. As the weight of their suspicion pressed down on him, the first officer finally said, "All right, son. Why? Don't you open your bag for us?" Jamal hesitated, his fingers trembling as he reached for the zipper. He pulled it open slowly, showing his math homework, the library book, and the sandwich wrapped in foil. Nothing dangerous, nothing suspicious. Just the belongings of a normal schoolboy. The officer looked inside, then at Jamal. But before he could speak, Mrs. Harper stepped out of her house. Her voice carried across the street. "That's him. That's the boy I called about. He was acting strange, looking around, stopping by houses. I knew something wasn't right." All eyes turned toward her. Jamal's chest tightened. His lips parted in shock. This stranger, this woman he had never met, was the reason he was standing here, being treated like a criminal. His heart sank. He wanted to shout that it wasn't true, that he hadn't done anything. But the words stuck in his throat. The officers looked at Mrs. Harper, then back at Jamal. The situation grew heavier, and the air seemed to freeze. The neighbors watched in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. And in that tense moment, Jamal realized that his ordinary walk home had turned into something he could never forget. The trouble had arrived, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. Jamal stood frozen, his small hands clutching the straps of his backpack as if holding on for safety. His heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out the distant noises of the neighborhood. All he could hear was his own fear. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in his wide eyes, making the moment feel unreal, like something out of a bad dream. The officers were still studying his open bag when Mrs. Harper's voice cut through the air again. "I saw him. He was sneaking around, looking at people's houses. He stopped, crouched down, and was acting like he was checking for something. I know what I saw. He didn't belong here." Her words sliced through the silence like sharp blades. Jamal turned toward her, his eyes full of shock and disbelief. Sneaking? Checking houses. He had only been tying his shoelace, picking up a leaf, and adjusting his backpack. But in her mouth, his harmless actions twisted into accusations that painted him as a threat. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Some frowned, uncomfortable with the way Mrs. Harper spoke. A few shook their heads, sensing something wrong. But no one stepped forward to defend Jamal. They stood at their porches and behind their windows, watching, waiting, too afraid to get involved. Jamal's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to explain, but his voice trembled. "That's not true," he said softly. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just walking home." The first officer held up his hand, his voice firm but calm. "Ma'am, let us handle this. We're asking the boy questions." But Mrs. Harper stepped closer, her face tight with self-righteous confidence. "I know trouble when I see it. Kids like him think they can come here and cause problems. I wasn't about to just let it happen." Her words carried venom, though she spoke as if she was saving the neighborhood from danger. Jamal flinched. He had never been accused of anything in his life, never even broken a school rule that serious. Yet here he was, standing in front of flashing lights, with strangers pointing fingers at him. His cheeks burned with humiliation. As he realized more neighbors were gathering, staring at him like he was guilty before anyone even listened to his side. One of the officers crouched slightly, trying to meet Jamal at eye level. "Listen, son, we're just checking things out. Someone called, and we have to make sure everything's okay. Just stay calm." But how could Jamal stay calm? His knees trembled. His palms were wet with sweat. He could feel every pair of eyes burning into him. His voice cracked as he tried again, desperate to be believed. "I'm telling the truth. I live just down the street. I go to Jefferson Middle School. You can ask my mom. She knows I come this way every day." The officer's eyes softened slightly, but before he could respond, Mrs. Harper interrupted again, louder this time, making sure the whole street could hear her. "Don't let him fool you. Kids like that know how to lie. They pretend to be innocent, but they're not. I've seen it before." Jamal felt the world closing in on him. "I'm not lying," he burst out, his voice shaking with fear and anger. Tears stung the corners of his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him cry. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. Some murmured in doubt, others in quiet agreement with Mrs. Harper. The weight of judgment pressed down on Jamal, heavier than his backpack, heavier than anything he had ever carried. He wanted anyone to step forward and say they believed him. But no one did. The officers exchanged glances. They didn't see a criminal in front of them, but they couldn't ignore the woman's repeated claims. Procedure required them to check, to ask questions, to take every report seriously. And so, the accusation hung in the air, shaping their view of Jamal, even without proof. Jamal's chest rose and fell quickly as he tried to steady his breath. He felt smaller than ever, standing in front of adults who saw him as something he was not. He thought of his mother, of how she always told him to stay respectful if ever questioned by authority. "Stay calm, Jamal. Use your words. Don't argue. Don't give them a reason." He repeated her advice silently like a prayer, even as his heart screamed for him to run, but he stayed rooted to the ground, staring at the officers, his voice trembling but clear. "Please, I didn't do anything. I just want to go home." Mrs. Harper crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was convinced, in her own mind, that she was right. That single thought gave her a cold satisfaction. She didn't see a scared child. She only saw her own fears reflected back at her, and she had already decided those fears were true. The accusation lingered in the air, heavier than the sirens that had brought the police. Jamal felt its weight pressing into his skin, into his heart. It wasn't just about that afternoon, it was about how people saw him, how quickly they judged him, how easily they could twist innocence into guilt. And just as the tension reached its peak, the low hum of a powerful engine broke the silence. A black SUV turned into the street, its tinted windows glinting in the fading sunlight. It rolled to a stop near the police cars, and the door opened slowly. Every head turned. Tiva. The officers straightened, their posture suddenly alert. Out stepped a tall woman in a dark suit, her presence commanding immediate respect. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she strode forward, her eyes locked on Jamal. His heart leaped with relief. "Mom," he whispered, his voice shaking not just with fear anymore, but with hope. The woman's face was calm but fierce. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her badge, and in that moment, the entire street shifted. The boy who had been accused was no longer standing alone. His mother was here, and she was no ordinary mother. The street had fallen into a heavy silence. The flashing police lights painted the houses red and blue. Neighbors stood frozen on their porches, and Jamal's small frame looked even smaller under the weight of the accusations. His throat was dry, his hands trembled, and his heart hammered in his chest. But then, a sound cut through the tension, the steady hum of a powerful engine. Everyone's heads turned as a sleek black SUV rolled slowly into the street. It didn't rush, it didn't swerve. It moved with calm authority, as if it belonged there, as if whoever was inside already knew exactly what was happening. The vehicle pulled up right behind the patrol cars and came to a smooth stop. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall woman dressed in a sharp, dark suit. Her black heels clicked against the pavement as she walked with deliberate, confident strides. The air seemed to change with her arrival, the kind of shift that happens when someone important enters a room. Her presence was commanding, yet calm. Her eyes scanned the scene, quickly her son, the officers, the crowd, and finally the woman standing across the street with arms folded like a judge. "Mom," Jamal's voice cracked as relief washed over him. He didn't care who was watching. The moment he saw her, his fear lessened just a little. The woman Special Agent Carla Johnson locked eyes with her son. The fear in his face made her blood boil, but she didn't show it. Her training taught her to stay composed, no matter the storm. She walked straight to him, her posture tall and unshaken. "Are you okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Jamal nodded quickly, though his eyes watered. "They stopped me. They said someone called about me." "I didn't do anything, Mom. I swear." His words tumbled out, desperate, frightened. Carla put a protective hand on his shoulder, then turned her gaze to the officers. Her eyes were sharp, steady, and unblinking. In one swift motion, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a leather badge holder. She flipped it open, revealing the gold crest of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The officers froze. Their posture shifted instantly, their authority meeting a higher authority. They glanced at each other, then back at the badge, realizing exactly who they were standing in front of. Special Agent Johnson. "FBI," she said firmly, her voice ringing clear for the entire street to hear. "This boy is my son." A ripple. of whispers spread through the neighbors. Heads turned. Some gasped quietly. Even the children watching from porches leaned forward, eyes wide with surprise. The woman who had been painted as just another worried mother was suddenly revealed as someone with immense power, someone who had dedicated her life to enforcing the law. The officers straightened their backs. "Ma'am," one of them said carefully, "we were just responding to a call." "I know," Carla interrupted, her tone icy but controlled. "I heard enough." She glanced toward Mrs. Harper, who stood frozen near her front yard. The woman's earlier confidence seemed to evaporate. Her arms loosened, and for the first time that day, she looked uncertain. Jamal pressed closer to his mother, relief mixing with the sting of humiliation. He knew she was here now, and that changed everything. Carla adjusted her badge so everyone could see it clearly before tucking it away. Then she looked back at the officers. "You stopped and questioned a minor based on a call with no evidence? No crime and no reason other than someone's biased assumptions." Her voice was calm, but each word struck like steel. The first officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. We can't ignore reports from residents." "Oh." Carla's eyes narrowed. "And did you see any crime here? Did you see this boy damage property, steal, or threaten anyone? Or did you stop him because of one woman's words?" The officers didn't answer right away. The weight of her question hung in the air from across the street. Mrs. Harper finally found her voice. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." He looked suspicious. He was sneaking around enough. Carla's voice cut through like a blade. She turned, her gaze fixed on Mrs. Harper, who visibly flinched under the sharpness of her eyes. "That's my son." He was walking home from school. He tied his shoelace. He picked up a leaf. "And you turn that into a crime in your mind? You have any idea what could have happened here? Do you know what fear you put in him?" Mrs. Harper's face drained of color. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, the weight of her actions pressed down on her. She had never expected the boy's mother to arrive like this. She had certainly never expected her to be an FBI agent. Asterisk, the neighbors whispered louder now. Some shook their heads at Mrs. Harper. Others murmured about how wrong it all was. The story they had been watching unfold suddenly shifted, and the woman who had been so sure of herself now looked small, exposed, and guilty. Carla turned back to the officers. "I expect a full report of this call, including who made it and why. If there had been any harm done to my son because of false suspicion, you would be facing a very different situation right now." "Yes, ma'am," one officer said quickly, his tone respectful. The other nodded in agreement. Jamal clung to his mother's side, finally letting out the tears he had been holding back. Carla rubbed his back gently, whispering, "It's okay. Baby, you're safe now." But inside, she burned with anger. Just for her son, but for every child who had ever been judged unfairly. She knew this moment was more than just about Jamal. It was about teaching a lesson that would echo long after the flashing lights disappeared, and as the SUV's engine cooled in the background and the officers shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the truth. One thing became clear. The unexpected entrance of Special Agent Carla Johnson had turned the entire story upside down. Asterisk. The street was so quiet that even the faint rustling of leaves could be heard. The flashing police lights still spun slowly, painting the neighborhood in alternating shades of red and blue, but the energy had shifted completely. What had begun as a scene of accusation was now something else entirely. The balance of power had moved, and everyone could feel it. Special Agent Carla Johnson stood tall, her hands still resting protectively on Jamal's shoulder. The golden FBI badge she had revealed moments ago gleamed in everyone's memory, even though it was already tucked back inside her jacket. It wasn't just a piece of metal, which is a symbol of truth, authority, and years of service to the country. For the officers, it was a reminder that they were not the highest authority here. For the neighbors, it was a shocking twist. And for Mrs. Harper, it was a crushing revelation that her suspicious boy was not only innocent, but also the son of a woman far beyond her reach. Jamal clung to his mother's side, still shaken. His small body trembled, his eyes swollen from tears he had tried so hard to hold back. But for the first time that day, he felt shielded. The woman who had always protected him at home was now protecting him in the middle of the street, in front of everyone. Carla's gaze swept slowly across the scene, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her very presence demanded silence and respect. The officers shifted uncomfortably, the weight of their decision settling heavier by the second. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. "Agent Johnson, we apologize. We didn't know. We were just responding to the call." Carla's expression didn't soften. "And what did you see when you arrived?" she asked, her voice calm but piercing. The officer hesitated. "We saw a boy. Just a boy walking home." "Exactly," Carla said, her words sharp. "And yet here he stands, shaken, humiliated, treated like a suspect. Why? Because one person's prejudice was enough to bring you here with lights flashing and questions ready." She didn't raise her voice, but the truth in her words struck like thunder. The neighbors murmured louder now. Some nodded in agreement, others avoided eye contact, ashamed they hadn't spoken up sooner. A few even stepped back into their homes, not wanting to be part of the moment anymore. But no one could deny what was happening. The truth was out in the open, and it was undeniable. Mrs. Harper stood stiffly near her fence, her arms no longer crossed. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open, but no words came. The confidence she had carried earlier had drained away, replaced with the heavy weight of realization. She had called the police on a child. She had lied to herself, twisted his harmless actions into something dark. And now, in front of the whole street, the boy's mother had exposed her mistake in the most powerful way possible. Carla turned toward her, her eyes narrowing. "You called the police on my son because you didn't like the way he looked walking down the street. You didn't ask him where he was going. You didn't ask yourself if he was just a student heading home. You saw his skin, and you made him a suspect in your mind." Mrs. Harper swallowed hard. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. For once, her voice so loud and sure, earlier failed her completely. The crowd was watching. Every word, every gesture, every look was being absorbed by dozens of eyes. Carla knew it, and she intended for the lesson to be heard clearly. "This isn't just about my son," she continued, her voice firm. "This is about every child who has been judged before being known. Every innocent person treated like a criminal because someone let fear guide them instead of facts. Do you understand the danger you put him in?" Mrs. Harper's face turned red. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the ground, but there was no escape. The truth was burning, and she couldn't hide from it. The first officer stepped forward, slightly, nodding. "She's right," he admitted quietly. His partner glanced at him, then lowered his head in agreement. "We shouldn't have handled it this way. We should have looked closer before acting." The acknowledgement hung in the air. It didn't undo the fear Jamal had felt, but it was something. It was rare for officers to admit faults so openly, but Carla's presence left no room for excuses. Jamal finally found his voice, soft and shaky. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just walking home." His words carried pain, but also a strength that came from telling the truth in front of everyone. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. For them, this wasn't just a scene anymore, it was a mirror, a reflection of how quickly silence could allow injustice to grow. Some of them whispered apologies under their breath, though not loud enough for anyone to hear. Carla knelt slightly, turning to Jamal, her tone softening only for him. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart. Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." She brushed a tear from his cheek and pulled him closer. Then she stood tall again, her eyes once more locking on Mrs. Harper. "The next time you think about calling the police, think carefully about the story you're telling yourself. Because today, your story could have ruined a boy's life, and tomorrow, it could do even worse." Mrs. Harper's lips quivered. For the first time, she looked smaller than the boy she had accused. Her confidence had frozen into regret. Her voice silenced by the weight of her mistake. The revelation was complete. The neighbors had seen the truth. The officers had acknowledged their error. And Mrs. Harper had been stripped of her false certainty. But most importantly, Jamal had been shown by his mother's strength that truth and justice could rise, even in the face of fear and prejudice. And as the evening light dimmed, the red and blue reflections faded slowly from the houses, leaving behind a neighborhood forever changed by what it had witnessed. Mrs. Harper stood like a statue near her white fence, her arms limp at her sides. A short while ago, she had spoken with boldness, her voice loud enough to summon police cars and gather neighbors to their porches. Now she was silent, frozen in place, her face drained of color. The same eyes that had watched Jamal with suspicion now darted nervously, unable to meet his mother's piercing gaze. The world around her didn't feel the same anymore. What had once been her safe, quiet street had become a stage where her mistake was laid bare for all to see. The whispers of her neighbors weren't whispers of support. Now they were whispers of judgment, shame, and disbelief. She really called the police on a child. One neighbor murmured, "I saw him walking. He wasn't doing anything." Another replied, shaking his head. The words stung Mrs. Harper like needles. For so long, she had prided herself on being watchful, on keeping the neighborhood safe. But now, everyone saw her not as a protector, but as the woman who had nearly destroyed a boy's innocence because of her fear and prejudice. Carla's presence made the truth impossible to deny. The FBI badge, the commanding voice, the unshakable Kamal of it stood as proof that Mrs. Harper had crossed a line that could never be hidden. Jamal, still close to his mother, turned his gaze toward the woman who had accused him. His eyes, wet with tears, carried more honesty than words ever could. He didn't shout at her. He didn't curse or scream. He just looked at her, hurt and bewildered, as if asking silently, "Why me? What did I do to you?" That look pierced Mrs. Harper deeper than Carla's words. For the first time, she saw Jamal not through the lens of her suspicion, but as what he truly was, a boy. Just a boy, walking home with a backpack and a song on his lips. A boy whose only crime was existing in her line of sight. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to explain that she had only been trying to help. But every excuse that rose in her mind turned to ash before it reached her lips. How could she defend the indefensible? What words could possibly undo the fear she had caused? The officers shifted uneasily, glancing at Carla but avoiding Mrs. Harper's eyes. They knew the weight of the moment, and they wanted no part in shielding her from the truth. One officer finally spoke. "Ma'am," he said, quietly to Mrs. Harper, "it looks like there was a mistake here." His words were polite, but the meaning was sharp. A mistake, that was the soft word for what had really happened. Mrs. Harper felt her knees weaken. For a moment, she thought she might collapse right there on the lawn. She gripped the fence to steady herself, her fingers white against the wood. Carla's voice rose again, calm but strong. "Do you understand what you did? You made a child into a suspect. You turned innocence into guilt. And you didn't even hesitate before calling the police." The silence that followed was crushing. The neighbors' eyes bore into Mrs. Harper. Some glared openly. Others shook their heads, their disappointment plain. Mrs. Harper finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just thought—" Her words trailed off. She couldn't finish the sentence. The truth was too heavy. "You thought wrong," Carla said firmly. "And if I hadn't arrived when I did, your wrong thought could have scarred my son for life, for worse." The weight of those words sank deep into Mrs. Harper's chest. Images flashed in her mind. Jamal being handcuffed. Jamal being dragged into a patrol car. Jamal being treated like a criminal in front of the whole neighborhood. She felt her stomach twist as she realized how close she had come to destroying a boy's future. Her lips trembled. She wanted to apologize, but the words felt too small, too shallow compared to the damage she had caused. What good was an apology when the memory of this day would never leave Jamal's mind? Jamal lowered his eyes, his hand gripping his mother's suit sleeve tightly. He didn't need to hear Mrs. Harper's excuses. He didn't even need her apology. What he needed was safety, dignity, and the chance to walk down his street without fear. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. Some crossed their arms, glaring at Mrs. Harper openly now. Others muttered, "Shameful, disgraceful." A few even looked at Jamal and his mother with sympathy, offering small nods of support. The shift was clear. The community wasn't standing behind Mrs. Harper anymore. They were standing against her. Mrs. Harper's heart pounded. Her face burned with humiliation. The power she thought she had, the power of her voice, her assumptions, her call to the police was gone. She felt stripped bare in front of everyone, and so she froze. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't defend herself. She was locked in her own regret, standing still while the truth towered over her. Carla didn't need to say more. The frieze of regret was already written across Mrs. Harper's face. Everyone could see it: the wide eyes, the trembling lips, the heavy breaths of a woman who realized too late the damage of her choices. The moment hung heavy in the air. For Jamal, it was a painful memory being carved into his young heart. For Carla, it was a reminder of why she fought every day for justice. And for Mrs. Harper, it was a punishment stronger than any fine or warning living. With the shame of what she had done, exposed before the very community she thought she was protecting. And as the lights from the police cars flickered across her pale face, Mrs. Harper understood something she had never considered before. Sometimes the harshest prison is not made of bars, but of regret that never fades. The street was still, wrapped in a silence heavier than any sound. The flashing police lights had slowed to a steady pulse, but even they seemed less bright, as though the truth that had been revealed had dimmed their power. Jamal stood pressed against his mother's side, his small hand gripping her sleeve, his wide eyes scanning the crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch. His heart was still racing, but now he knew he wasn't alone. His mother was here, and she was stronger than anyone else on that street. Carla Johnson, FBI agent, stood tall, her presence filling the space like a shield. She had spoken the truth. And now the truth hung in the air, undeniable and unforgettable. The officers shifted uneasily, their earlier authority now humbled by the woman before them. The neighbors remained quiet, their whispers fading into uneasy silence, each of them reflecting on what they had witnessed. Carla finally broke that silence. Her voice was firm, clear, and steady, carrying through the air so that every ear could hear. Today, my son was judged not for what he did, but for what someone assumed about him. He was walking home from school, carrying nothing but his homework, his book, and a sandwich. Yet here he stands, accused of things he never did, treated as if he were dangerous. Her words rolled through the crowd like waves, striking deep into the hearts of those who listened. No one could argue, no one could deny it. The truth was too plain, too painful. She turned her gaze slowly toward the officers. You have a duty to protect, to seek truth before you act. Remember this moment the next time a call comes in. Remember the look on my son's face when he was stopped, frightened, and humiliated for no reason. The officers nodded, their heads bowed slightly, guilt written across their faces. They couldn't erase what had happened, but they could not forget it either. Then Carla's eyes moved to the neighbors. Some of them looked away, ashamed of their silence. Others met her gaze, nodding slightly, their expressions filled with remorse. You all saw it, she said. You saw how quickly an innocent boy became a suspect, and you stayed quiet. Maybe you thought it wasn't your place. Maybe you thought someone else would speak up. But silence allows injustice to grow. Don't ever forget that. Her words were not angry, they were heavy with truth. Carved from years of seeing how silence and fear had harmed too many lives. Finally, Carla turned to Mrs. Harper. The woman stood stiff and pale, her lips trembling, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. The freeze of regret still held her, but now she felt the full force of the community's eyes upon her. You, Carla said, her voice softer now, but no less powerful, must live with the weight of your choice. You didn't see a boy. You saw your own fears, your own prejudice, and you made them his reality. And tonight, when you sit alone in your house, I hope you remember not just what you did, but who you did it to. A child, my child, a boy who only wanted to walk home. Mrs. Harper swallowed hard. Her voice was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of shame. I'm sorry. But her apology was too small against the enormity of what had happened. The word floated weakly into the air, but it did not erase the tears Jamal had shed, nor the humiliation he had felt. It did not erase the flashing lights that would forever live in his memory. Carla didn't respond to the apology. Instead, she bent down to her son's level, cupping his face gently in her hands. Listen to me, Jamal, she said, her voice now tender. You did nothing wrong. Never forget that. People will judge you for things you can't control, but their judgment is not the truth. The truth is who you are, good, kind, smart, and strong. And you are stronger than what happened today. Jamal nodded, his tears finally spilling over. He buried his face in her shoulder, and she held him tightly, shielding him from the stares of the crowd. The neighbors watched, their hearts heavy. Some of them felt ashamed, others enlightened. But all of them knew that this day would not be easily forgotten. The story of what had happened on their street would echo long after the police cars drove away, long after the lights faded. It would be whispered in kitchens, spoken about in living rooms, and remembered every time someone looked at the boy who had once been accused for nothing more than existing. The officers finally returned to their cars, their radios crackling as they prepared to leave. The lights flickered one last time before switching off, plunging the street back into its ordinary calm. But nothing about the neighborhood felt ordinary anymore. Carla took Jamal's hand firmly in hers and began walking him home. Each step was steady, deliberate, as though she were not just walking her son to safety, but walking him into a future where he knew his worth, no matter what others assumed. Behind them, Mrs. Harper remained frozen, her regret carved into her face for everyone to see. The once proud woman who thought she was protecting her community now stood as a warning reminder of how dangerous prejudice can be when it is given power. As Carla and Jamal disappeared down the street, the neighbors slowly returned to their homes, but the silence lingered. They all knew they had witnessed something bigger than themselves. It was not just about one boy, one woman, or one call. It was about the lesson that assumptions can destroy, silence can wound, and truth will always reveal itself in the end. And so the lesson echoed, carried on in whispers and in hearts, etched forever into the memory of that street. Justice begins. Not with flashing lights or badges, but with the courage to see people as they truly are.